Hi, this is Cass. I'm here digitally in this box, talking about unmasking from the inside, and specifically as someone who was diagnosed with autism for the first time, 36. I'm 36 now. This was a few months ago. Trying to understand different parts of the time afterwards. One thing that has really jumped out to me is besides the external parts of like how we're open when we're in public, when we're talking to people, and we're having these interactions, when we're expressing ourselves within ourselves, like what does it look like to turn towards our own experience more as opposed to managing it? And I think what I have learned about myself in this process, gosh, there's so many ways to approach this, but what I wanted to start with is just what I've learned is that I have for the longest time managed my reactions to things with the goal of being like, I want to figure out how to not feel bad. I want to feel, but I want to not feel bad. I want to do what I want to react to my own self feeling bad in such a way that I change that I don't feel bad. That sounds like I want to feel good, right? It sounds like I'm seeking good. But what's really happening is that through a broad expansive experiences like ambiguous social hangouts or times of great transition or times of great stress or times where it's really humid and clammy like right now or times where I feel completely unsafe or overwhelmed or stimulated, that my reaction wouldn't be like, oh, I don't like this, or oh, I want to avoid this. It would basically be to not notice that that's how I'm feeling and instead notice the negative appraisal of like, ooh, this is hard for me, and try to control that to be like either feel really honestly kind of like self, harmy about that, be like, I gotta not feel bad, I'm gonna find a way to make myself feel better, or to just get really sort of down on myself for not being able to feel good when I want to feel good, not being able to enjoy my friends or to enjoy these different situations, and then spiraling with that. And I think that what I've sort of seen in myself and learned from all the things that you learned in this time, all the videos and books and podcasts, all these different directions that we can take in information. I'm a librarian, so I'm like very into finding sources, analyzing many different kinds of sources. But anyways, what I have noticed is that the core of what I thought was how do I feel better, or how do I not feel bad, rather. How do I just make the bad feeling go away? The core of that is actually what am I experiencing? Like I used to just ask myself the question, how do I feel right now? Which is a very hard question for me to answer. But more recently, it's shifted to being, what am I actually like thinking about? Like, what are my thoughts? How do they work? And this is what I wanted to talk about today: is what it feels like to enjoy and connect with systems thinking and pattern thinking and repetitive thinking. I actually, it's, this should be more obvious, but I never really thought about the way I think, which is often rapid, associative, very, very verbal, very non visual for me. I had a therapist once say that, oh, you ruminate more than any client I've ever met. Like, you spend hours and hours and hours. For me, the obsessive thing is like searching advice online or analyzing text or trying to just think verbally my way through different things or listening to tons of podcasts or videos and taking in information and trying to find that all, here's what I'm experiencing. That's kind of my pattern, right? Once I got the diagnosis, it took me a while to even start to think like, what is autistic about my thinking? Because the first set of things I sort of came across was like, oh, well, you might have these stereotyped behaviors. You might be really into special interests. You might be really into repetitive or rote things. You might be very monotone in delivery, and to some degree I relate to some parts of these. Obviously, I'm very like, blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, I cracked my ankle on this floor. That was intense. nonetheless, it wasn't until I decided to talk to HR at my job. I decided to talk to the accommodations office, and I met somebody who she was awesome. Like she did this thing I don't think I've ever fully experienced, which is that it was the first time this would have happened. I told her I was autistic and I was learning what that meant. And she said she was very professional about it, but she did eventually share, like, oh, I actually am too, and this is something I've had to incorporate into my life. And then what she did was she actually deliberately unmasked in our conversation. It was really interesting. Like her behavior completely changed, her excitability, her responsiveness, her kind of willingness to go there with herself, to pursue something mentally, even when it was like kind of breaking the contract of like it was like quote unquote less professional because it was more kind of giddy and reactive and hyper. Like I don't know, you could use those words, but so she did this thing, but also we talked about the thinking because what she said, which had never occurred to me, is like autism is in the thoughts. Like it's this sort of high saturation of thinking and ways of relating and patterned thinking, and that is a lot of the cognitive work is actually about trying to deal with that reality by doing things like downloading from your brain to representing things with text. And I had never really thought about, when I had been all these years of being online and expressing myself in YouTube series or other types of messages or like forums or, kind of these different spaces, live journal posts, that a lot of what I was doing was seeking reassurance from other people, but also externalizing my own process, having a place where that process could live and giving it some life, like honoring it. Because I think a lot of what I felt was often quite lonely. Like I would have to then take all my thoughts and excitement and maybe I'd make it into something artistic, like a zine or a song. But as I got older and that was a little less reliable for me, life got more chaotic. There were more social demands in college and afterwards, that I realized that all of this mental activity kind of didn't really have a place to go. Like it was really superfluous to how I was expected to act in different situations. And I don't know, I just realized like what was once like a really joyful thing for me, which is just to, like I've often thought about the experience of being up late pacing because I'm working on thinking about laying out a zine, like kind of full of ideas of how to arrange it and just having that possibility and moving and walking and expressing it that way. All of those things, like the world really didn't moment to moment, day to day, seem to want that from me. And so I think I just kind of further made that into my enemy. Like I didn't really see that as myself. I saw it as something to get over or control. And in this conversation, I loved that, this person was telling me like, so the autism's in the thoughts. Like it is a lot, and you do have to find ways to just like process it and move on. But also, it's not a question then of like the thoughts are the enemy, don't think, but you are a person who has these mental patterns, and like this is part of what's going to help you get through your days and find a way to not burn out or not have such a trouble with this type of back-to-back meeting or whatever the case may be. Give me the tools to do what I need to get through. And that idea of accommodating myself, while not necessarily focusing on the external behaviors, but seeing the patterns that are happening internally, really struck a chord with me. Another thing about me is that I love like ecosystems and environmental systems. So I experienced the reason why I ultimately sought a diagnosis after years of it coming up some time to time in my therapy sessions, is that I experienced like several like traumas in a row. Unfortunately, like just there was a community trauma, like a shooting, and then there was my I was the live-at-home caregiver to a family member who went through a stroke, and it was on me to take care of her. And then I moved for school, for a new grad program, for a giant career change, and I was working full-time and studying full-time. I was adding up all these things, and then, like so many folks who I've learned have this experience around autism, is that my brain and my nervous system just like stopped. I was like catching, like it's a bike. If you've ever had a bike where you're shifting gears and you try to go to the next gear and the chain just falls off, and no matter what you do, you can't create that motion again. You just kind of slow down. And I kept trying to fix it. Like I moved here, and I was getting ready to go to school. Everything was wrapping up. I was finishing classes. I was finishing work. I was getting ready for my student loans, and I started just going to the one place that I could kind of clear my head, like this one coastal area at low tide. Like I would just go again and again and again, and I would take pictures, and I would absorb it, and I would think and study and learn about the way that the intertidal zone works. So my other video on this channel was about this, was a product actually of this time, because I realized there was so much to learn about like the particular patterns of the power of the waves, and then how they receded, and then how this ecological niches and how creatures survive in that space. I've never been a big ocean person, but it was nonetheless like really interesting to me, really fulfilling. And meanwhile, everything else kind of dropped out, like my functionality, my ability to, I kept getting sick. I could not study. I couldn't think about this new career, and I lost a lot of drive and mental health, and it was a real crisis time. And my therapist very kindly was like, I think maybe this is the time we look back at that diagnosis process. And I went through that, and I was diagnosed, and I'm very, very grateful for it. And it's just interesting. Like, so I've always loved different environmental metaphors. And so in this conversation with, I'm all over the place. I hope you find something in this. Maybe you won't. Maybe I have to not release this version. I don't know. I might. Why not? This is a first little ramble for fun. But this person said, in addition to calling the autism the thoughts, which I thought was so interesting, talked about like mangrove ecosystems, which is, I'm actually new to those. Like I love wetlands, different niches, but I've never encountered mangrove ecosystem. I'm based in like Northeast United States. I don't think there are any in this region, but she was describing basically that like it's almost like our thoughts and our intensity of thoughts are like the salt, and we have this whole ecosystem that can draw out the salt, like the trees, and can successfully live with salt water and live in this context. Like it's great, it's possible, but it's all a balance too. And if there isn't a system to both absorb and to excrete, salt, there isn't kind of balance and design features to make it work, then it will come out of balance. So I found that really empowering, because it made me realize that like, oh, something I do is I think in terms of systems. I look for these patterns. That is really fulfilling for me. I enjoy having a very kind of like high volume mental time day to day. Like that's kind of how my brain works. And I'm not saying it's like I'm so smart or capable, or that they're so successful, or they go anywhere all the thinking. Far from it. But nonetheless, like that's kind of like the volume or the texture of what's going on in my brain, right? And when I think a little differently, just inwardly, of like, so what does it look like if I actually notice how I'm thinking? That I notice these patterns. One thing I've been interested in learning about, and I'm still learning about, is in addition to kind of the external stereotype behaviors related to autism, like what's going on the level of like the brain developmentally, that is for me really empowering, in the sense that it shows that like there are ways to better understand like these patterns and to relate them to the outside, but that I might just look and be like, oh, I enjoy both these big connections, like thinking in terms of connections, patterns, but also like staying repetitively in this one type of thinking, this one type of behavior. And that is actually a lot of research seems to suggest, although it's all kind of shaky. Like, I don't know if I really want to vouch for any of the brain science fully. Like, there's lots of issues just of who gets tested in what way and how that evidence has been constructed and contested. But a lot of it seems to point, or at least one set of theories around like connections across the brain and connections within the brain. So either there's like lower levels overall, or there's increased levels in smaller areas like neighborhoods, but then worse connections outside. So like, while I think of like a city, like a city and it's in a public transit system. So maybe in a typical city, there'd be like, you can walk around the neighborhood and you can take a bus and get across the city. Maybe an autistic brain, what might be happening is like it's a lot harder to catch a bus, but there's a really lively like block neighborhood scene. And so you get, I think, or it's just there's everything's a little slower and slowed down, almost like a city in a snowstorm. It's like one of those two things potentially. And what that brings to mind is just like, wow, there's so much character and specificity and diversity and eccentricity in like the hyper neighborhood block model. It reminds me of like New York City. I have friends live in Brooklyn, and going there, and it's like, whoa, like everything feels so specific at this very small level, and this like patchwork, and so many cultures, so many things going on. There's like the bodega culture, there's all this stuff, and it's like, oh, mentally, I actually do really resonate with that. Like for me, it's like, being in this kind of research mode, or for me, it's touch, so like tactile pressure, like, and if I'm in that mode, I have like almost all of my sensory things, or the strongest stuff is like related to touch of like, I went and I swam in the ocean yesterday, and that was like extremely powerful for my nervous system. It was like an epiphany, or going to sleep if I don't have enough pressure in my body. It's the opposite. It's like I feel hopeless and stressed, and it's like I don't exist, in terms of connection, like hugs are really important to me, or there's all kinds of, like, touch just shows up again and again for me. And then the visual, though, is like really turned down. So like I don't really focus that much on visual information. I used to kind of like fantasize when I was a kid of just like I used to walk around with my eyes closed in my room and around the house, because I was just like, I don't really want to take in this visual stuff. Like, I can just do it without looking. And I would fantasize, like, maybe I just wouldn't have eyesight one day. Like, that would be good. And that one's been interesting because, actually, those two together, because the like, overall sort of societal representation of those things is, like, like, there's such a strong emphasis on the visual in the United States in, like, 2020s. Like, how things look a certain way. How do you appear? It's a lot of it is about perception and visual perception. And touch is really misunderstood or put in like only in the sexual box, and like that's it. And so it's just been interesting to like get to know myself in those ways and be like, oh, damn, like I don't care about visual, and it does make it harder sometimes I have to remember like mess matters, aesthetics can matter in some context, all these different things. But this world of touch is so extremely vivid for me, and I want to like fight for it in the same way I want to fight for my conceptual systems and ways of thinking and ways of organizing. Those are all very expressive. So what do we do with all this stuff? What do I do with all this stuff? I don't know. I think that the reason why I'm focusing, I guess, on like thought and thought patterns and systems is, again, because I just found myself feeling really unsatisfied that a lot of the conversation around like recognizing autism in yourself, like a self-diagnosis, or how do you get diagnosed, or what happens after you get diagnosed, was focusing so much on like patterns of traits per se, when I felt like this aspect of certainly sensation and like stimming and like choices you can make, but this aspect of thinking was really unclear to me. Of like, I get this idea of special interests and rituals, and I mean, God, I love to Google like people describing their special interests. It's so fun. I will let soon. Maybe that'll be a second video because I have a lot to say about that. But it just made me realize that, like, unmasking also just happens within us to ourselves, making ourselves more clear to ourselves. And, I think that, I don't know. I think that the more that I let myself have that experience, like, this is an example of making this YouTube video. So for myself, the experience of composing and creating and externalizing what's going on within me, on one level, it can be seen as like a social maneuver, like me being like, I want to connect over this, or like, here's me making my identity around this. I mean, maybe both things are a little true, but I think for me, and partly why I'm okay having this be kind of chaotic, is that there's something really wonderful about the act of speaking in public with some ambient perception, with being part of kind of a loose community doing that, but then just experiencing myself being like, okay, I'm making space for this. Like, it's not just in the loop in my head alone. I don't want to do this, but like, it's not like in this neighborhood of my brain and then it's being like a shut-in. It's not a question of just like being like, let's pace the same block again and again and again in the Brooklyn neighborhood example. But it's like lingering there. It's like going to the bodega. It's like talking to people there. It's romanticizing my walks. It's starting to sketch and make art from it. It's all these different pieces. So yeah, I think that's maybe a little bit of what's going on in my brain around this. I would love to hear people have questions or things resonate about kind of autistic thinking. I mean, I also think that just kind of, I know I find videos like this just helpful, just hearing people describe and articulate. Although I'm guessing some people will watch this and be really impatient with how I am digressive in thinking. Like, I know I have like pressured speech and it's kind of like hard to follow. I'm very distractible. But I've learned, again, like, maybe one little thing is that I feel like the closest example I often had of like neurodivergent expression before I realized I was autistic is, what I whisper that, autistic is like ADHD. And I may or may not have ADHD. I was diagnosed with it as a kid, but not medicated since I was like 15 or 16. But I've actually really not found that as useful to focus on, at least right now, in part because I've found it to be so powerful to realize that, like, while many autistic people also have ADHD, and I very well might, a characteristic pattern in ADHD, or the focal point, is often some version of like, I don't know, what I understand it to be is like you're moved, or you're following the beam of attention, or you're being compelled in these different directions, or like you are finding fulfillment in that change or that novelty, something like that. And for myself, I just find it so much more accurate to say like everything's kind of firing at once. It's more of like this very like the liquid ecosystem full of salt is very like saturated. It's like humidity. That's another thing I've thought of recently. It's like, it's really humid, and I don't like the humidity. Speaking of the pressure sensitivity, ugh, I hate humidity. But it's a different type of problem, because on one hand, there's the solution of just like, well, turn down all the volume, get it out of your brain, think less, turn it down, which is something you can do at sometimes. But just like actual humidity, sometimes this is like the pattern, like this is the nature of things. Like, I really want to be walking these few neighborhoods. Like, I'm glad that I'm not equally bouncing around these different areas, and like, I'm glad that I have these things I really want to do, like play with these fidget balls. And that is just different. I haven't seen that. I've seen that more in the ADHDs, like reconciling these two patterns, pieces. But I'm new to recognizing that in myself, and just for the autism piece of it. So it's partly why I wanted to express that here. So yeah, so next time I think maybe I'll talk about the things that I deeply love, which you've already heard a little about in nature, Another thing is women's basketball. Another things is like games labor and like the games industry, the digital video games industry. And there are some other things, but that is for another time. So I hope this resonated with you on some level, gave you sort of a peek at some mental patterns. And yeah, thanks for your time. All right, stay cool if you're in a heat zone place.